The autumn rain had been falling over Seattle since late afternoon, a slow and indifferent drizzle that coated the streets in a thin mirror of reflected light. City lamps smeared gold across the wet pavement. Leaves plastered themselves against the curbs in orange and rust. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet stone, of coffee shops with steamed windows and old neighborhoods clinging to themselves against the coming cold. Elena Cole stepped out of her car, a black sedan driven by a man whose name she always forgot to ask, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk outside a restaurant called Harrow and Vine. She wore no umbrella. The drizzle touched her collar, her dark hair, the shoulders of her charcoal coat, and she let it, because for once there was no assistant rushing to cover her and no schedule demanding she move faster. She was 38 years old and worth more than she could ever meaningfully spend. Her company, Cole Dynamics, had closed a $4.2 billion acquisition that very morning. Her name would be in the financial press tomorrow. Her face had appeared on the cover of a business magazine the previous spring, smiling the kind of smile that photographers instruct rather than capture. She stood on the sidewalk in the rain and felt entirely, profoundly, ordinarily lost. Inside the restaurant, through the fogged glass, she could see light and motion. Families, couples, a man wiping a child's chin with a paper napkin, a woman laughing at something her companion said, head thrown back, hand over her mouth. The warmth behind that glass was not the warmth of money. It was something else, something older. Elena pushed open the door. 3 months earlier, her executive assistant, Carolyn, had placed a printed itinerary on her desk and said, "You haven't taken a day off since March." She had looked at the itinerary, moved it to the corner of the desk without reading it, and gone back to her call. Elena had built Cole Dynamics from a 2-person startup in a rented basement office in Capitol Hill into one of the most valuable private technology companies in the Pacific Northwest. She had done it with 14-hour days and a refusal to let sentimentality interfere with decisions. She was not cruel. She was not careless with her people, but she was relentless in a way that made warmth feel like an indulgence she had not budgeted for. Her penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building in South Lake Union. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked down over the city in every direction. She had a personal chef who came twice a week and left meals in the refrigerator labeled by day. She had a cleaning service. She had a driver. She had 4 people whose entire job was to manage the logistics of her life. She had not cooked a meal in 6 years. She had not walked to a grocery store. She had not sat in a waiting room, or stood in a line, or eaten at a table surrounded by strangers in longer than she could recall. The acquisition that closed that morning was the culmination of 11 months of negotiations, 3 failed deals, 2 rounds of due diligence, and 1 very public bidding war that had made her temporarily the most discussed CEO in Seattle's technology community. Her board had congratulated her with handshakes. Her CFO, Derek Holt, had opened a bottle of champagne in the conference room at noon. Her head of communications had already drafted the press release. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the champagne was gone and her office was quiet, and Elena sat at her desk looking at the Seattle skyline through the rain-streaked glass and felt nothing in particular. Not pride, not relief, not the satisfaction she had expected would arrive with a deal of this size. Just a mild, buzzing emptiness, like the air after a song has ended. She told Carolyn she was leaving early. Carolyn blinked. In 4 years, she had never left before 6. "Should I reschedule your 7 o'clock dinner with the Hargrove team?" "Yes," she said, already reaching for her coat. She had walked past Harrow and Vine a dozen times in the preceding years without going in. It was the kind of place she registered as existing warm light, a chalkboard menu visible through the window, a neighborhood institution without ever thinking of it as a place for her. She went to restaurants where reservations were made weeks in advance, where the sommelier knew her name, where no one sat close enough to overhear a conversation. She went to places where being wealthy was the assumed condition of every person in the room. That evening, walking through the rain with her hands in her coat pockets and no destination in mind, She found herself standing in front of it. She thought, maybe tonight I'll sit somewhere normal for once. She pushed open the door. The restaurant hit her with warmth and noise the moment she stepped inside. Not the curated, carefully modulated warmth of a fine dining room, but the real, slightly chaotic warmth of a full house on a wet weeknight. Coats on the backs of chairs, children coloring on paper placemats, conversations overlapping each other without any of them needing to stop. The hostess stand was just inside the door. A young woman with red hair pulled back and a tablet in her hand looked up. "Hi. Welcome to Harrow and Vine. Do you have a reservation?" "No," Elena said. "Table for one." She winced slightly, that apologetic, preemptive wince that service workers develop when they need to deliver unwelcome news. "Oh, I'm so sorry, we're completely full tonight. We've been slammed since 5:30. She turned the tablet toward her briefly, as if showing her the evidence. Every time slot was blocked. "I can put you on the wait list, but I'm estimating about an hour and 45 minutes. Elena nodded slowly. She reached inside her coat and withdrew her card case. Old habit. She held it for a moment. Is there anything she started? And then stopped herself. The hostess was already shaking her head with the practiced, pleasant firmness of someone who had received this particular offer before. "I really am sorry. We don't hold tables back. Everyone's just," she gestured at the room behind her, full and alive and entirely indifferent to her credit limit. "Already here." She put the card case away. She stood for a moment, half turned toward the door, uncertain what to do with her hands. Through the restaurant, she could see people at every table, a family of 4 in the back corner, a couple sharing a bottle of red wine near the window, 2 older men laughing at something between them, a father at a table by the fireplace cutting something on a child's plate, while the child watched with solemn, evaluating eyes. Elena could not remember the last time she had been somewhere she could not simply choose to be. Not the last time money had failed to smooth a path, the last time money hadn't even been the right tool. She was not being excluded because of who she was. She was simply one person without a reservation in a full room, the same as everyone else. She realized she didn't know what to do with that. She reached for the door handle. The voice came from her left. Not loud, not demanding, just there. She turned. At a table for 3 near the window, a man was looking at her, 34, maybe 35, with the kind of face that stayed honest even in repose. Broad jaw, dark circles under steady blue eyes, a flannel shirt with a small grease stain near the second button that he either hadn't noticed or hadn't cared about. Across from him sat a little girl, 7 years old, with dark braids and a placemat she had already covered in crayon drawings of what appeared to be horses. There was a third chair at the table. Empty. The man nodded at it. "You can sit with us if you want. We've got the room." Elena stared at him. It was such a simple offer, so straightforwardly human that for a moment she had no category for it. People did not invite Elena Cole to share their table. People arranged things for Elena Cole. They cleared paths and held doors and confirmed her preferences in advance. They did not just gesture at an empty chair and say, "You can sit with us." "Daddy," the little girl said, without looking up from her placemat, still focused on the horse she was finishing. "She looks lonely." Something in the sentence landed without warning. Not because it stung, because it was accurate. The man, her father, looked mildly at Elena, not with pity, but with the uncomplicated practicality of someone who sees a problem and has a solution at hand. Elena said, "I don't want to interrupt your dinner." "You won't," the man said simply. "We just ordered. I'm Liam. This is Emma." Emma looked up briefly, assessed her, and went back to her horse. "Hi." Elena unbuttoned her coat and sat down. He could not have explained, in that moment or later, exactly why. Not entirely. It was something about the chair being there, and the offer being real, and the little girl's matter-of-fact observation still settling somewhere in her chest. It was something about the evening already being strange, about the acquisition and the champagne and the 6 o'clock she'd canceled, and the rain. It was something about the fact that nobody in this room knew who she was, and for once, that felt like freedom rather than anonymity. She sat down. She picked up a menu. She said, "I'm Elena." The conversation started the way conversations do when two strangers are thrust into proximity without the usual scaffolding of mutual context. Carefully, with pauses that neither person rushed to fill. Liam Carter was, he explained, an HVAC technician. He worked for a company called Meridian Climate Solutions and had been there for 6 years. He liked the work because it was concrete, something was broken. You found the fault, you fixed it, you left, and the thing was running again. There was a clarity to it that he found satisfying in a way that was hard to articulate. "What do you do?" he asked Elena. "Technology business," she said. "Software, mostly." Liam nodded. "Like writing code? Managing the people who write code, mostly, and the money around it." Liam seemed to find this roughly as interesting as it sounded described that way, which was not especially interesting, and Elena found herself unexpectedly grateful for that response. Emma, for her part, had opinions. She informed Elena that horses were the best animal, that her school had had a fire drill that day and she had been assigned to hold the door, that her teacher, Mrs. Whitfield, had a very loud sneeze, and that the bread at this restaurant was excellent and she should have some. She pushed the bread basket toward her with the authority of someone who has thought carefully about hospitality. "Thank you," Elena said, taking a piece. "You're welcome." She returned to her drawing. A new horse had appeared, this one with wings. "She talks a lot," Liam said, not with apology but with quiet pride. "I noticed." Liam smiled, just slightly. It changed his face considerably. "She's good at it." The food arrived. Liam had ordered a burger. Emma had macaroni and cheese. Elena had ordered the roasted chicken almost without thinking, because it was the first thing she'd read on the menu and for once she hadn't wanted to deliberate. At some point, Emma looked up from her plate and asked, "Do you have kids?" The question landed in a small silence. "No," Elena said. Emma considered this with the philosophical openness of a 7-year-old encountering an unusual fact. "Do you want some?" "Emma," Liam said gently. "What?" "It's a normal question." "It's fine," Elena said. She looked at her plate for a moment. "I don't know. I haven't thought about it very carefully." Emma seemed to find this a reasonable answer. She went back to her macaroni, but Elena sat with it. The truth was, she hadn't thought about it very carefully, which meant she had thought about it and redirected herself so consistently that thinking had become not thinking. There was a version of her life in which the question had been deferred so many times that she had simply forgotten to eventually stop deferring it. Across the table, Liam poured ketchup onto his burger with the precise economy of a man who has done this 10,000 times and will do it 10,000 more. And Emma picked up her crayon again, and the fire in the grate threw warm light across all of it, and Elena ate her chicken and listened to the sound of a full restaurant and felt, without understanding why, like she had stepped into something she had been standing outside of for a very long time. It was Emma who fell asleep first, which startled all three of them, because she had been talking about a Pegasus she intended to paint on her bedroom wall with permission. She was careful to note, because she had learned her lesson about the hallway, and then somewhere between one sentence and the next she simply stopped, and her cheek was against her folded arms, and she was gone. Liam watched her for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee and held it in both hands. "She does that," he said. 0 to asleep in about 45 seconds. "I used to be able to do that when I was young." "When did you lose the ability?" "About 3 years ago." He said it without particular weight, but Elena heard something in the brevity, the way certain facts are delivered without ceremony because they've been carried so long they no longer require announcement. She didn't ask. But Liam told her anyway, the way people sometimes do when a stranger is the right audience, because they carry no history and will carry none forward. His wife, Claire, had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of lymphoma 18 months after Emma was born. They had spent 2 years in and out of treatment centers. Emma had been too young to understand most of it, old enough to feel all of it. Claire had died on a Tuesday in February, 3 years ago, with Liam sitting beside her hospital bed holding her hand and Emma asleep in the chair in the corner, too young to be there and too close to be anywhere else. "I'm sorry," Elena said. Liam nodded once. "We're doing okay," he said. Not as performance, not as deflection. It had the quality of a true statement, assessed regularly and maintained deliberately. "She talks about Claire sometimes," he said, looking at Emma. "Not sad, just matter of fact. My mom is in heaven and she had really curly hair and she could whistle really loud, like she's making sure she doesn't forget the details." Elena didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. "She wants to be an artist," Liam said, "or a veterinarian, depending on the week." The veterinarian thing started because one of her friends has a rabbit. He looked at his coffee cup. "I'm trying to make sure she gets to try things. Art classes, swimming lessons, it adds up," but he stopped, looked up. "Sorry, I don't know why I'm telling you all this." "I asked," Elena said, which was not exactly true, but felt more useful than the truth. Liam looked at her for a moment with slightly narrowed eyes, the look of someone recalibrating. "What about you?" he said. "You said technology business. That's a big city for a big category. What are you actually doing?" And because it was late and the fire was low and Emma was asleep and there was no one in this room who would recognize her or record her or need anything from her, Elena told him. Not the press release version. Not the investor pitch. She told him about starting Coal Dynamics in a rented basement office with her college roommate, a woman named Gordon Staves, who had left the company 7 years ago, and whose friendship Elena had failed to maintain and regretted in ways she didn't fully understand. She told him about the acquisition that had closed that morning. She told him about sitting in her office at 3 o'clock in the afternoon with a glass of champagne going flat on her desk and feeling nothing that resembled what she had expected to feel. Liam listened. He did not offer career advice or perspective or the kinds of observations that people offer when they are really only waiting to relate something about themselves. He just listened. "That's a hard thing," he said when Elena finished. "Working hard for a long time towards something and then arriving there and it's just a Tuesday." "Yes," Elena said. "Exactly that." The couple at the table by the far wall had been glancing over for the better part of 20 minutes. Elena had noticed, without registering it, the way you notice peripheral motion without assigning it meaning. The woman, late 40s, silk blouse, the particular alertness of someone who reads business news, habitually leaned forward and said something to her companion. Her companion looked over. Verity, his expression changed. Liam was looking at Elena with a slightly puzzled expression. "They know you, I think." The woman had risen from her chair. She was coming toward them. "Miss Cole? I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm Patricia Hargrove, Hargrove Capital. We were supposed to have dinner with your team tonight, actually, before it was rescheduled. I just wanted to say congratulations on the valiant close. Remarkable deal." She was professional, warm, and entirely irrelevant to the evening in a way that felt suddenly, viscerally clear. Elena thanked her. She shook her hand and retreated. She turned back to the table. Liam was looking at her with an expression that had not yet settled. "Coal Dynamics," he said. Not a question. Silence. Liam looked down at the table briefly, the look of a man running a rapid mental accounting of the evening. Then he looked up. "I invited a billionaire to share my table because I felt sorry for her." "You didn't feel sorry for me," Elena said. She paused. "You just saw someone standing there." Liam thought about this. "I mean, I did feel a little sorry for you. That's fair." A small pause. Then Liam laughed a real laugh, brief and surprised, and it broke whatever had been tightening in the air. "I should apologize," Liam said, though his voice said the opposite. "Don't," Elena said. Emma stirred at the motion of the laugh. She blinked, looked between them, assessed the general situation, and apparently found it acceptable. "Are you done talking about adult stuff?" "For now," Liam said. "Good." She straightened and pulled her crayon drawing toward her. "I'm going to add a castle." Elena looked at the drawing. 5 horses, 2 of them winged. A structure in the corner that might have been a castle or might have been a barn. Her name, written in purple, in a corner Emma must have added while she wasn't looking. "Is that?" she started. "I asked Daddy what your name was," Emma said, with the unself-consciousness of someone who has never felt the need to explain artistic choices. "You're a character now." Elena looked at her name, written in purple crayon, surrounded by winged horses, and understood that this was probably the most accurate portrait of her that had been produced in years. She said, "Are you famous?" She said it in Emma's voice. She realized, playfully, surprising herself. Emma looked up. "Not in the way that matters," she said, because she had apparently been listening earlier. They left the restaurant after 10. The drizzle had shifted, grown slightly thicker, still not quite rain, still not quite mist, the specific Pacific Northwest precipitation that defies easy naming. The street outside Harrow and Vine was quiet, the foot traffic thin to the occasional couple hurrying under a shared umbrella. Elena's driver was already there, having received the text she had sent from the table. The black sedan idled at the curb. "I can drop you wherever you're going," Elena said. Liam had Emma on his hip, half asleep again, her cheek against his shoulder and her purple crayon still loosely in one hand. He looked at the car, then at the wet street ahead. "We're 6 blocks," he said. "Walking in the rain is kind of our thing. We have a route." "A route, right." Past the bookstore, the one on Clement, with the orange light in the window, then through the park. He adjusted Emma's weight slightly. "She usually wakes up for the park. There are usually a couple of raccoons." Elena looked at them. Emma's fingers had curled around the collar of her father's flannel shirt in sleep. The purple crayon was pressed against his shoulder. She thought about her penthouse, the clean surfaces and the labeled meals and the rooms she moved through alone. The city spread out below the windows, full of people doing things like this, walking routes in the rain, looking for raccoons, knowing which bookstore had the orange light, and her, above all of it, observing. "Thank you," she said. "For this evening." Liam looked at her steadily. "You paid for dinner. You gave me a place to sit." Liam seemed about to say something, and then instead he just nodded. That minimal nod of a man who has accepted the terms. "Take care of yourself, Elena." "You too." Emma, without fully waking, mumbled something that might have been goodbye or might have been a continuation of whatever she was dreaming about horses. Then Liam turned and walked, and the rain closed around them. And Elena watched them until they turned the corner, Emma's purple crayon still visible against the shoulder of the flannel shirt in the amber of the streetlight. And then they were gone. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than was necessary. Her driver opened the car door. Elena got in. She looked at her phone, at the press releases and congratulatory messages and investor communications waiting for her in the dark screen. She put it back in her pocket without turning it on. She rode home through the rain and did not think about the acquisition once. She thought about them the next day. She had a 9 o'clock board debrief and a 10:30 with the communications team and a 2 o'clock that ran until 4:15, and in between every one of these she thought about the dinner. Not obsessively, not with any clear purpose. Just the way you think about something that has lodged in a real place, recurring like a chord that continues after the song. She told herself it had been a pleasant evening, an anomaly, the kind of thing that happened occasionally in cities, an accidental warmth between strangers that was real in the moment and dissolved on contact with ordinary life. She went home. She ate the meal her chef had left labeled Wednesday. She stood at the window with a glass of water and looked at the city. On Thursday, almost without deciding to, she walked back to Harrow and Vine at lunchtime. The hostess, a different one, a young man with round glasses confirmed, when asked carefully. That yes, a regular named Liam came in on weekday evenings sometimes, usually Tuesdays or Wednesdays. Elena did not go back on Tuesday. She recognized the line between wanting to maintain a connection and inserting herself in a way that would be intrusive or strange. She was aware, with the self-awareness of a woman who has spent years making decisions, that there was a version of this where her interest was helpful, and a version where it was simply the exercise of a larger life crowding into a smaller one. She made inquiries through more neutral channels. A real estate attorney she knew had access to public records. She was not searching for leverage. She was looking to understand. What she found. Liam Carter rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the Finney Ridge neighborhood. He had been there 4 years. His landlord, a property management company that had recently been acquired by a larger investment firm, had sent notices to most of the building's tenants, announcing rent increases of between 22 and 30%, effective in 60 days. The increases were legal. They were also, in several cases, including Liam's, close to the outer edge of what a working person could absorb without material disruption to their life. Elena sat with this information for 2 days. The easy version was money. She had more money than any useful accounting of her needs could require. She could quietly resolve the rent situation in a dozen ways. Anonymous landlord negotiations, direct assistance, any of several mechanisms that wealthy people use when they want to help without making help a transaction between them. The problem was that Liam Carter was not a person who would accept that, and more importantly, he was not a person who should have to. There was a dignity in the way Liam had navigated the conversation at dinner, in his quiet, "We're doing okay," in the way he never complained, never asked, never positioned himself as someone in need. He had offered Elena a seat. He had not asked for anything in return, because that was simply not how he moved through the world. And Elena understood, in a way she had not expected to need to understand, that how you help matters as much as whether you help. That a gift which requires someone to accept their own diminishment is not a gift. She called her head of facilities. She said, "The building's HVAC system needs an audit. I want an outside contractor. Get me names." She reviewed the names. She made a call. Liam Carter did not know who had recommended him for the Coal Dynamics contract. The facilities manager who called him was named Howard Briggs, a practical man who explained that the company's climate control systems across 2 buildings needed a comprehensive evaluation and ongoing quarterly maintenance, and that Liam had come highly recommended from Meridian's portfolio. Liam had said he would need to check with Meridian. Meridian, having been approached separately by Howard Briggs with a very reasonable subcontracting arrangement, told him they were happy for him to take it on. The work started on the 2nd Monday of November. Liam arrived at the Coal Dynamics building on South Lake Union at 7:30 in the morning with his diagnostic equipment and his work order and a coffee in a travel mug. He had been in many corporate buildings. He had been in lobbies where the art cost more than his car, and conference rooms where the windows looked out over things he did not own. He had fixed broken heating units in buildings like this his entire career, and he had always found that the buildings were just buildings. Machines needed tending everywhere. He was in the 3rd-floor mechanical room, running diagnostics on a secondary air handling unit, when a voice he recognized said, "How's it looking?" He turned around. Elena Cole was standing in the doorway in a suit, collar open, holding a coffee cup. She looked, in this context, slightly different from how she had looked in the restaurant, more formal on the surface, less formal underneath, if that made any sense, which Liam decided it did. "You're the client," Liam said. "3rd-floor unit has been running hot on the east side of the building for about 6 weeks, Elena said. "Everyone's been complaining." Liam looked at her for a moment, long enough to decide something. "You could have just called me," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd answer." "I would have answered." Elena nodded. "The east side unit. I'll let you work." She left. Liam turned back to the unit and started checking dampers. He found the problem 40 minutes later, a stuck actuator on the variable air volume box. A simple fix, but one that had cascaded into the entire East Wing, running 2 to 3 degrees warmer than set point. He fixed it, documented it, moved on to the next unit. At noon, he was in the building's small cafeteria, eating a sandwich he had brought from home when Elena appeared again, this time with her own lunch, and sat down across from him. "The East Side's going to feel different this afternoon," Liam said. "I know. Howard already texted me." Liam ate his sandwich. Elena ate something that looked like it had come from a meal service. "Emma's in an after-school art program now," Liam said, not because it was relevant, but because it was true. "On Tuesdays, she painted a raccoon last week. It looked like a raccoon." Elena looked up. "Not a horse?" She said, "Raccoons are more interesting because they're smarter, and you can have a conversation with them." Has she had a conversation with one? She's working on it. The cafeteria was almost empty. Through the window, the November sky was a pale gray, the harbor visible in the distance, a container ship moving slowly toward the sound. "She could come by sometime," Elena said. "The building's got a big conference room with whiteboards on 2 walls. She's welcome to draw on them. The facilities team covers them over every Monday anyway." Liam looked at her steadily. "You're inviting a 7-year-old to graffiti your conference room? I'm inviting her to use available wall space." The corner of Liam's mouth moved. "I'll ask her." He did not need to ask her. Emma had strong opinions about available wall space, and they were uniformly in favor of using it. She came on a Friday afternoon in early December, while Liam finished his maintenance round on the 4th floor. She set up in Conference Room C with a set of washable markers. Elena's assistant Carolyn had quietly left on the table and over the course of 2 hours produced a panoramic mural of what she described as the city if it had horses and also a lighthouse. Carolyn stood in the doorway for a while, watching, which she described to a colleague the following week as the most interesting thing that had happened in the building since she had started. Elena passed the conference room twice that afternoon without going in. On the second pass, she stopped in the doorway. Emma had her back to her, adding detail to the lighthouse with an orange marker. "What's the lighthouse for?" she asked. "So people know where to go," Emma said, without turning. She stood there for a moment. "That makes sense," she said. She walked on down the hall, and behind her the building hummed quietly at the correct temperature, and through the window, the gray water of the Sound caught the last of the afternoon light. A year passed the way years do when they are full. Quickly in memory, slowly in the living of them. The contract extended. The East Side unit held. Other units required attention through the winter, and Liam returned to the building regularly. And because Liam returned regularly and Emma was out of school on Fridays, Emma came on Fridays, and Conference Room C accumulated, despite the Monday wipe-downs, a palimpsest of drawings that the facilities team had stopped fully erasing and started thinking of as a rotating gallery. Elena's assistant, Carolyn, who had worked for her for 4 years and considered her a functional but emotionally underdeveloped adult, noticed the change with the quiet attention of someone who has been watching a situation develop without being sure it would. She started leaving before 7 more often than not. She remembered the name of the person who delivered her coffee in the mornings. She asked Howard Briggs. Once, how his wife's surgery had gone, a detail she had retained from a passing comment 6 weeks earlier, and Howard had looked at her for a long beat before answering. "You seem different," Carolyn said to her in February, with the directness that had survived 4 years of employment. "In what way? You ask about people." She thought about this. "I asked about people before. You asked for status updates on deliverables," she said. "It's different." Elena had no useful response to this, which was itself a change. The friendship between Liam and Elena deepened in the way adult friendships do when they are real. Slowly, without fanfare, through the accumulation of small honestnesses. They were not the same person. They did not share a background, a tax bracket, a profession, or most of their daily concerns. What they shared was something harder to name: a directness, a tendency to say what they meant, a wariness of performance that recognized itself across the difference. Liam talked about Claire sometimes. Not often, not with grief that required management, but with the ease of someone who has learned to carry love that has no present recipient. He told stories the whistling, which Emma had apparently inherited and was developing into an art form. The way Claire had argued with sports commentary on television, as if the commentators could hear her. The time she had convinced a highway patrol officer to let her off a speeding ticket by delivering an impromptu lecture on traffic engineering that the officer had found too interesting to interrupt. Elena listened. She asked questions. She filed these stories next to the other things she was learning about how to be in a room with people rather than simply occupying the same space. In the spring, she called Gordon Staves, her former co-founder, whose number she had not deleted but had not dialed in 3 years. Gordon answered on the 4th ring, surprised. They talked for an hour. It was uncomfortable in stretches and then less uncomfortable, and then, at the end, something close to what it had been, though not the same. Gordon had children. She had a house in Ballard. She was working on something small and interesting. They agreed to have lunch. They had lunch. Summer came. Emma turned 8, and Elena attended the birthday party, which was held in Liam's apartment and involved 7 8-year-olds, 2 raccoon-themed cakes. Emma had been firm about the raccoons, and one extremely ambitious attempt at a piñata that Liam had constructed himself, and which proved structurally nearly indestructible, eventually requiring the assistance of every adult present, including Elena, who had never hit a piñata before, and approached it with the seriousness she brought to most physical challenges, which made Emma laugh so hard she had to sit down. "You're very bad at this," she told her, still laughing, sitting on the floor with raccoon cake frosting on her chin. "I'm aware," she said. "You can practice," Emma said. "We can get another piñata. There don't need to be more piñatas. There should always be more piñatas," Emma said, with the certainty of someone who has given this position serious consideration. Autumn returned. The rains came back to Seattle in the way they always do, not announced, not dramatic, just present one morning in a way they hadn't been the day before. The leaves turned. The city contracted toward its indoor self. Elena made a reservation at Harrow and Vine for 3 people on a Tuesday evening in October. Not the same Tuesday, but close enough that she noticed. She told the hostess, the young man with round glasses, who had become a familiar face, the name and the time, and that she would be there with 2 guests. She arrived first. She sat at a table by the fireplace. The restaurant was full, the windows fogged at the edges, the noise warm and layered. Liam and Emma arrived 5 minutes later. Emma in a coat with a bear on the back, Liam in the flannel shirt, a different flannel shirt, but of the same general persuasion. Emma sat down, assessed the menu, and announced that she was having macaroni and cheese again, which she noted was a good choice because when something is perfect, there is no reason to change it. Liam sat across from Elena, and they looked at each other for a moment, the way people do when they are sitting inside the fact of a friendship and both of them know it. 1 year, Liam said, something like that. Emma was already drawing on her placemat. She had found a purple crayon in her coat pocket and was putting it to use. After dinner, she reached into her backpack, a backpack covered in raccoon patches that Elena had contributed to, and withdrew a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and placed it in the center of the table. It was a painting. She had done it on thick watercolor paper at art class, with care and over multiple sessions, based on the evidence of the layered color. 3 figures stood together in the rain, under a streetlight, on a wet street. The light caught the puddles. The smallest figure had braids and was holding something that was either a horse or a crayon. It was interpretive. The tallest figure stood on the left with his shoulders a little rounded in the way that Liam's were. The third figure stood on the right, slightly apart. And then there was a small detail. A hand, reaching out. The fingers not yet touching, but reaching. Emma had written at the bottom, in the careful print of a child who has been practicing, "Us." Elena looked at it for a long moment. She thought about the evening a year ago. The drizzle on the windows, the full restaurant and the empty city, and the way she had stood at the door, feeling like a woman who had arrived at the right address and didn't know if she was allowed to knock. She thought about the chair that was simply there, the offer that required nothing of her but the willingness to accept it. She thought about the things she had learned to do and the things she was still learning, and the long business of becoming a person who is present rather than merely nearby. She was still a billionaire. She still ran a company. She still lived in the penthouse. These facts had not changed, and they were not the story. She picked up the painting carefully by its edges. "This is very good," she said. "I know," Emma said. "I worked really hard on it." Liam watched her with the steady, undemanding attention that was its own kind of gift. Outside, the autumn rain fell across Seattle, gold and quiet, and the city moved around the three of them at their table by the fire, and Elena Cole, who had everything and had lacked the one thing that couldn't be purchased or arranged or scheduled, sat inside the warmth of it and felt, simply and without ceremony, like herself. Sometimes the most valuable thing in the world is a seat at someone's table.